So, if you didn't know my last video, I talked about Brad Holmes' top 10 draft picks, and I briefly mentioned how much I love the draft process in general, which leads to this next video about the topic of draft and development. So in layman's terms, draft and develop is basically a philosophy NFL teams use to develop their team primarily through the draft and put a huge emphasis on developing them as their cornerstones of their team long term. Historically speaking, teams like the Packers, Steelers, and the Ravens have been the poster child for this type of philosophy. In most cases with this philosophy, not all draft picks are the same, nor have the same development curve, which leads to different timelines for each player. Enter the Detroit Lions. Detroit has certainly adopted this philosophy for their franchise to set up long-term success for their team so that sustainable success can be achieved. However, as of late, Lions fans have become impatient and have often criticized certain high-profile players for not seeing early returns on their draft picks. As you may have guessed, most of the criticism has been primarily towards the 2023 first-round draft picks in Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell. Although the criticism has cooled off for the most part with Gibbs, fans seem to be putting all their attention towards Jack Campbell now, who I'll admit is not having the best season when compared to the rest of the draft class he is linked to. However, I feel like it's been unfair to Jack and to Gibbs back when he wasn't getting the production the fan base wanted, as there is a perfectly reasonable explanation on why everything hasn't been lights out from Jack Campbell, and I'll explain why. As mentioned before, teams like the Packers, Steelers, and the Ravens are often praised for their ability to draft and develop, but it's not an instant success thing with this whole approach. When you draft a player, you're often drafting someone who needs development to fully adjust to the pros, as the college and the pro game is vastly different. It is very rare to find a so-called day one guy where you could just plug and play and they automatically become really good football players from the jump and don't need much development. You know, like your Justin Jeffersons, your Penei Sewells, just guys like that. That's the reality of the NFL draft and the reality of the NFL. Let's go back to one of the teams I briefly mentioned with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Probably the best example to compare the Jack Campbell situation with the Steelers player is probably Cam Hayward. If you didn't know, Cam Hayward was selected 32 overall in the 2011 draft. He's had a stellar career thus far, but it didn't always start like that, as he didn't play much early in his career, and I often remember Steelers fans telling me that he wasn't that good either. From what I gathered with talking to Steelers fans, he seemed to be going through what Jack Campbell seems to be going through. Most of you are probably thinking, why am I comparing Jack Campbell to a great player like Cam Hayward? And to be honest, I really think Jack Campbell can be really good. Jack Campbell didn't become a first-round pick based on a crazy hunch like David Gettleman had for Daniel Jones. Jack had some really good tape, and a lot of people, both fans and the draft media, were really high on him. My next example comes from the Green Bay Packers, and his name is Rashawn Gary. In the beginning of his career, he had a similar situation with Cam Hayward in terms of a lot of Packers players were disappointed with him in the beginning, and it took some time for him to become what the Packers organization envisioned him to be, and seems to be playing his best ball of his career. Rashawn Gary was a 12th overall pick and became a cornerstone for that Packers defense. And finally, for my example for the Ravens, we have Justin Madubuike. I'm so sorry if I butchered that name. JM was drafted in the 2020 draft as a third-round pick out of Texas A&M. And I know, sure, he's not a first-round pick like the others, like I mentioned, but there are still some similarities with him as he started off slowly in terms of starts and production in his rookie year. But just like with Rashawn Gary and Cam Hayward, they eventually became high-end starters, and JM in this situation, he's currently having his best season of his career, where at the time of this recording, he has 10 sacks in 12 games. I could have easily said Lamar Jackson, but I don't think that would fit this video because it's Lamar Jackson, so anyway, let's continue. I do want to make it a point that the linebacker position is also one of the hardest positions in the NFL to play, let alone adjusting to the college level to the NFL. Hell, Fred Warner was a third-round pick out of BYU and really didn't become Fred Warner we all know very well until like his third or fourth year. Matt Milano of the Bills didn't become who he was until his second or third year. I think the reason or reasons why people are so quick to dismiss Jack Campbell and call him a bust is because of a variety of reasons. Most notably is because he plays linebacker and he was picked in the first round, and not many people value taking linebacker that high. Another reason is that the position he's been put in. For some reason, Aaron Glenn likes to put him at edge or Sam linebacker. Jack Campbell certainly hasn't played well this season, but let's not forget, Brad Holmes is about the long-term vision of this team, and sometimes it takes time, and patience to see those results. I know fans don't want to hear that, but again, that's the nature of this team. That's what this team is about. We're not going to throw bags and F them picks. And a lot of Brad's best picks fit the draft and develop philosophy. And a lot of these players that are part of the Lions moving forward have different development paths and timelines. J-Mo and Gibbs were under major scrutiny from the fan base and were going to extremes to deem them a bust, whether it was the drops from J-Mo or the fact that Gibbs was a wasted first round pick and people were taking Dan Campbell's chase a pace back comment way out of context. Derek Barnes and Ali McNeil were deemed as failures by a large part of this fan base as well, but by year 3, they are a part of the young core on defense moving forward and have very distinct and important roles. What's kind of odd about this fan base is that these players I just mentioned don't get the same patience and understanding as with someone like Hendon Hooker, for example, who just recently was cleared to officially practice with his team. But I guess Lions fans treat the quarterback position differently and have a narrative to push with the potential of Hooker's development. Do I like Hooker as a prospect and think he could be developed into a possible maybe, but that's the one position I don't mess with on projecting how they'll end up for the most part, because it's hard to predict a quarterback's success coming out of the draft. I guess the intention with this video is that I feel like we need to stop with these extreme takes when Brad Holmes and company has shown us results since day one, especially with the circumstances of what Jack Campbell is facing.